Hi everybody, this is the third and last of the three installments of the videos I'd like you to watch before October 3rd when I return and we get together for class. This one is really talking about how to get started on exercise 3. I do have a lecture on kind of the history of and techniques of photo montage that I think I mentioned. I'm not going to record that one. I'll do that when I get back next week and we can talk about some of those principles then. What I'd really like you to concentrate on between now and Monday the 3rd is one, getting familiar with Photoshop so you're comfortable finding things in the menus, using the different tools, and just knowing where things are. And secondly, I want you to start working on a concept for your exercise 1 montage. So we should probably start by taking a look at that. So this is the exercise. As I mentioned, photo montage is a great way to bring together different images to visualize a proposed design idea. And sometimes this is done after you've done your design work. Sometimes this could be a preliminary conceptual tool where you just kind of put together a rough idea of what kinds of elements and where they would be placed within an existing space. And since most landscape architecture, or really every landscape architecture project, involves some amount of existing conditions, whether it's natural vegetation, whether it's existing buildings and an infill site, you can use photo montage to be able to capture the actual context of the design site and then put new elements into it to show somebody what that might look like. And use it as a way to explain and express your ideas, even if it's not the finished ones. So what we're going to do for this is use different versions of this over the years. This one is, we're going to use a couple different, it's your choice actually. I've got a couple different photographs that I'll show to you in a little bit after we go through the Photoshop techniques that you can choose and design a campus garden within that space. So I think one of them actually is, this is the entrance to the Ag Science, or yeah, I think it's the Ag Science building. And it's just a big concrete entry court. There's some steps in the back right side there. You can see in this picture, there's bicycle storage. There's some plants, but it's kind of an uninteresting, big open space that doesn't have really a very human scale or anything that would make you want to stay in that space. It's the kind of place you walk through, but you don't stop. So each of these different spaces has a theme. So I think with this one, it was just an entrance garden. So how do you make this more pleasing, make it a gathering space for people coming and going to the building, maybe a meeting place if people are getting together and it's nice, they want to meet outside and sit and talk, have a conference. Creating spaces for people to sit and talk and relax, come outside over the, in the nice weather and eat their lunch instead of being inside the building all day. That's the kind of space this one would, the kind of theme that I want you to think about if you choose this space. And then I have another site that's just down from the Stuckerman building, which is right beside Runkle Hall. And we'll talk about that one in a little bit. So anyway, basically the idea is you take a theme and then you design a campus garden within that space using photo montage as a way to design it. If you want to sketch out a plan or something, since you worked on plans, you can go over and both of these spaces are near the building. You can paste them out. You could pull the image off of the campus maps or Google Maps and then just paste it off, get the rough dimensions, have an idea how big it is, and sketch out your ideas in a plan view. But I want you to really think about it three-dimensionally. We don't want to always be designing in plan. Plan has its place, but we need to see what that looks like in 3 dimensions. So we'll start with that photograph, come up with an idea or concept for a garden, and including adding things like plants, paving, walls, fences, water, seating, structures, and people. So you can include other elements if you want, but as it says here, include other elements, be as creative as you like, but you must merge all these different elements into a effective and seamless composition. So it should look like all those elements actually belong there, even though they don't exist there presently. Some of the techniques you're going to do is kind of the removal or covering up of existing elements without actually erasing them from the original photo. Obviously, addition of new elements. You're going to demonstrate different selection techniques, cloning techniques, texture fills. We'll use that to put new textures either on the paving surface or on vertical walls or benches that you might include. You need to demonstrate that you understand how to use stacking order of layers and the use of layer mask, which includes this paste into technique. And then really making sure you match the perspective and adjust things to fit the way they should. Color and value matching. All the elements that you put in need to look like they're part of that original photograph. So there's a certain lighting angle, there's a certain brightness and contrast to it. There's certain colors, the vegetation, certain colors. So you want to work at trying to match that, and then include also adding shadows. So you can see some of the existing shadows up here. We want to make sure we add those in for any new elements as well, or they won't look like they belong. 40% of your evaluation is for composition, and you can read through the details. 20 is for creativity, and 40 is for technique, which includes organization, use of layers, edge quality, color balance, and stacking. Okay, so that's the basic idea. And what I'm going to do now is talk about, okay, how do we get this started with doing something like this in Photoshop? When I get back on the 3rd, we'll talk about selection techniques, extracting images, how to put all that stuff in there. What I want you to do is to actually come up with your design idea, because if you don't have a design concept, you don't know what elements you need, you can't look for the right images, you don't know how big they need to be. So that's the first step. Once you have that idea worked out, then you can go and find the images that you need. So I'm gonna do this first in a different Photoshop file. I apologize again for this cough. I'm just getting over a bad virus and sore throat, so try and get through this the best I can. This is down at the Alumni House, and it's just a photo that I took that contains a slightly off 90-degree 2-point perspective. And I'm going to show you in this one how we can find, since we have to put elements in here and fit them in, and we have to understand things like scale and size, the first thing you need to do with a photo montage is locate the horizon line and any vanishing points that are occurring in there so you can understand the scale of the space. So we can do this manually first by just extending some lines, and you'll learn to do this as you draw perspectives in your final rotation. But I'll show you how to do it very simply and quickly in here. Next, we're going to actually use something called the Vanishing Point tool, which is up here in the filter menu, that allows us to create a grid that we can lay over this. And if we size that grid, that's one of the problems with photographs or perspectives. They're not scalable. We can't measure anything in them because they're not like a plan drawing where they've been which is an orthographic drawing, which if you remember from the different projection systems means projection lines are parallel to the picture plane, so there's no distortion. Everything's at its actual dimension. But in a perspective, the projection lines are converging to the point of the viewer. So everything, what represents 5 feet, if this bench is the same size, you can see there's a line that's this distance here, but back here it's a short line. But in reality, those two benches are exactly the same size. So the Vanishing Point tool helps us do that by being able to size a grid, line it up with something like the bench. And if I know that bench is 5 feet long, and I can line my grid up with it in one direction, I know I've got a 5 foot by 5 foot grid. Then I can use that to go in and quickly sketch out some ideas in perspective, which is really a great help. So let's get started on that. The first thing we need to do in order to set that up is actually talk about layers a little bit. So this document, which it's already up there under exercise 1. It's a photo montage based image. I use this in class to go through this demonstration. So this one, it has the image layer and a background layer. We don't really need this. I think originally it was locked, but if you just click the little lock over here, it turns it off and you can delete it. But we don't want to start drawing lines on this layer because that's the original image and we'll mess it up if we do that. So we're going to open the layers panel, and if you don't see this icon over here, you can go to your window and choose layers or hit F7. That will open that up for you. Now I'm going to select that layer and click the new layer icon down at the bottom. It's a little dog-eared page icon. And I also, as I create layers, I really want to be careful to start naming them so I don't lose track. So I'm just going to select this and then say image. That one's pretty obvious, right? This one I'm going to let's just call it HL for horizon line. I'm going to make another one. I'm going to call that, and I'm just double clicking on the name. So if you click on it, you make the layer active. If you double click on the text, it allows you to edit it. And I will call this convergence. And then I will make one more, double click, and call that VP for Vanishing Point. Now, one of the other things we can do in Photoshop, layers are great, and they have a stacking order. So whatever's on this layer will cover up anything on this layer, which will cover up anything on this layer, which will cover up anything on this layer. So it's just a simple vertical stacking. It's like laying layers of trace paper on your drawings on your desk. Same exact concept. The little eyeball turns the layer off and on. If I click that, the image disappears. Okay. Selecting it, as I said, makes that the active layer. Whichever layer is active is where the paint is going to go when you start painting. So remember that. If you forget that this layer is active and you're starting to draw something you want on the convergence layer, it's going to end up down here. So in this case, since we don't want to do anything to the original image, I'm actually going to come up here and click on the lock all so that we can't draw, move, scale, transform. We can't do anything to that layer. Okay, so I've created those three layers. Now, the other way to organize things, just like you do on your desktop, or hopefully you do, is I can click on the top layer, hold the Shift key down, click on the bottom layer, and click on the panel menu and choose New Group from Layers. And I'm going to call this Perspective. Oops, if I can type it, Perspective. There we go. You don't have to change any of these defaults. We'll leave it at pass-through. That's fine. We'll get more into what those things mean later on. So now you can see they've all been collected into a nice, neat folder, and I can expand or contract that. Click on the little arrow, and it unfolds, and you can see the different layers. Once I draw something here, I'll move these around a little bit and show you how the stacking order can shift things. But right now, there's nothing on either layer, so it doesn't matter. So I'm going to start with the convergence layer. And what I mean by that, now to close this, I'm just going to click these double arrows, and that'll just fold that up until I need to open it again. What I want to do in order to find the horizon line is simply another way of describing the eye level line. And since I took this photograph, the eye level or the horizon line is my eye level. And I'm 6'1" tall, so whatever, it's a few inches below that. So, you know, it's 5'10", 11, something like that. But I don't really care what the height is right now, but I need to understand where it is. And I also know that the horizon line is perfectly horizontal, or in other words, it would be parallel to the top and the bottom, whereas these lines are converging to a vanishing point, so they're not perfectly horizontal. And I can demonstrate that by clicking on the ruler and dragging off a guide, and you can see if I line it up with the top of the building, here the building is really sloping at an angle down toward the horizon line. So where this meets an element that perfectly lines up horizontally, that's where the horizon line. Unfortunately, I don't have anything that lines up perfectly with it right now. Nothing long enough for me to find that. So I'm not going to try. That's a method you can use. If you can find something in the drawing that lines up with one of those guides, that's the horizon line level. So let's figure out another way to do it. I'm going to do it by, I know if you look at this wall here, that's converging, angling in here. And if you look at this one or this line here, it's angling across there. And basically, since this side and this side are parallel, the vanishing, both of those lines converge to the same vanishing point, which is on the horizon line by definition. You'll learn a lot about that in their last rotation. But vanishing points are always on the horizon line unless you're using a 3-point perspective, then they're not. But this is a 2-point. It was taken with a level, eye level view. I wasn't tilting my head up or down. Okay, so how do I find that? Well, I'm going to use the line tool, which is over here down 1, 2, 3, 4 up from the color chips. If you don't see it, click on it. You might see a rectangle, but it's in that same. Remember, I talked about the fact that there are flyouts with pop-up tool lists. So I'm going to choose a line tool. Now, remember, the first thing you do, check the options bar. Things like, okay, 1 pixel is probably too thin. I might make that 3 pixels so I can see it. And I have an option for what type of line I'm creating. I gave you that whole speech about vectors versus rasters. Well, in fact, although Photoshop is a raster program, They like to blur the lines. So you can actually draw vector shapes in here that are editable. The problem is it creates very special layers and you can't edit. It makes it more difficult to edit them. So what I want you to do, if by default, if you choose the line tool and up here this says shape, I want you to click on that and choose pixels. So what that means is when I draw this line, I'll get this rubber banding line that I can move around, but once I click and place the line, it becomes paint just like I painted it on with a paintbrush. So it's not editable anymore by changing transformation handles or anything else. And I'm going to pick a color. If you don't see this little grid here, go to the window, go to swatches, and I'm just going to pick a red color that I can see nice and easily. So with that, I'm going to come down here to this lower left corner, click right along the top edge. You see the little dot right in the center there? And I'm going to move this back and forth. I'm basically trying to follow the line at the top of that corner of the wall. I don't care how much I overlap up here, so don't worry about that. I'm just looking at it. I move it back and forth until I feel like I'm really kind of centering in on it. Okay? Now I'm going to try, maybe I'll do another one with this edge, because it's converging to the same place, right? So bring it out here. So already I've got a place where they converge. But I want to verify that by coming in from over here too. So I'm going to use this, and I'm going to do the same thing. Again, it's kind of small. I'm trying to look at it as carefully as I can. And, well, that was a pretty good shot, right? So if you look at where these two lines and that one intersect, it's almost exactly the same place. First time you do this in your photograph, you may not be that close, but if, let's say I take this one and I'm going in here and I'm like, okay, and I put that in there. So if I look at that now, this one, and this one seem to converge here. That one's off. That's close enough. That means my convergence point is somewhere like right in the middle of all three of those, and that's what I want you to do. It doesn't have to be perfect. So now what I'm going to do, and remember, we picked the convergence layer, so now those are on that layer. I can turn them off and on, because once I find the horizon line and the vanishing point, I don't need these lines anymore, and I don't need to see them, so I'll just turn them off. So now I'm going to switch down to the horizon line, and I'm going to switch colors. I'm going to go with a bright yellow. And I'm going to use the same line tool. I'm going to zoom in and say, okay, let's split the difference right here. I'm going to click, hold the shift key down, and just drag to the right until it goes all the way over. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to come right in the center, click, shift. Okay, now I might have missed that. Yeah, see, that shifted up a little bit. So I'm going to undo that. I'm going to try that again. That looks a little better. I just shifted my cursor down a little bit to compensate for it. It's kind of a rough preview. So now you can see that yellow line is behind the red lines. That's because the HL is below layer. Now if I move this up here, my horizon line is on top. It doesn't really matter because eventually I'm going to turn these lines off anyway. But for right now, actually I want to put that back down below so I can see where that is. And now I'm going to use a different color. How about, I don't know, dark blue. I'm going to go to my vanishing point, and I know one of these vanishing points is right there where that converges. So I'm going to click, hold the shift key down, and drag straight up. All right, and now I'm going to turn my convergence off. So now I have a horizon line that tells me what an eye level is in this particular image, my eye level, in fact, because I took the picture. And I can see where these lines that are on either side are converging to. Now, the back, the back line and the front line in this building, you can see those are the ones that are perpendicular to these lines. So if this is a near vanishing point, there's a far vanishing point that goes way out here. It's over my neighbor's front yard somewhere. And I can't find that on here, but I know that I can see this line and I can see the line of the porch here, and I understand which direction those things are going. That's where the vanishing point tool comes in. It's really actually quite helpful in setting that up. So now that we have the basic horizon line, let's go look at that and see if we can set ourselves up a grid. Before I do that, I am going to create another layer inside this folder. We're going to call that grid. Because once I create this vanishing point grid, it actually stays in the image, and I can look at it in this special vanishing point mode. But if I want to see it when I'm working, I have to render it back to a layer. And I know, generally speaking, Photoshop will not let you paste something on a layer where there's some other element there, because if you do and if it overlaps it, you ruin the original image. This is one exception to that. I'm not sure why, but the grid will go back on any layer you have selected. So that's why you always want to make a nice empty layer. Select that, and then you can close this down. Then we're going to go to the filter menu and choose vanishing point. So this jumps us out into a separate kind of modal dialog box. We're not back in the original Photoshop document right now. And you can see right up now I have a suite of tools here, but the first one is create plane. So I'm going to start here, not on the grass, but on the bottom of the brick. I'm going to click. I'm going to move along that bottom brick line until I get to about the back of where the flowers are here. I can't see that, but I'm guesstimating it's right there. Coming across here about to the corner, and then I'm coming out here, and if I have to, I can come down here and zoom out, because what I'm trying to do without coming out to the front is this front line here that I'm stretching out like this, that should look like it's converging to the same place as this line here. Takes a little practice. Initially, you maybe not going to quite get it, and I won't get it right the first time either. If I pull this back up in here, kind of looking at that is pretty close. Now, the way I can check this is now I can grab this center handle and pull it out. You can see, well, that's pretty close, but it's not quite. So I can move it back in, pull back out. Ooh, now I'm a little far the other way. All right, getting closer. It's a little trial and error. How about now? Oh, that's good. All right. So now I've got that lined up here. I've got it lined up here, and with the edges. Now the grid's a little dense, so what I'm going to do is come up here to grid size. And this it's not feet or meters or anything else. It's just relative. So I'm going to move this out until right there. You see what I did? I've got the little bit of front of the bench, a little behind here. Let's say that bench is 5 feet. I think it is. It's either 4 or 5 feet. Let's call it 5. So by lining this grid up, now I know this is a 5 by 5 grid across the entire thing. So what was an unscalable and unmeasurable photograph, all of a sudden now I've got a grid on there. And that's really the basis of every perspective system. You got to come up with some way to have a measurable grid in perspective that you know the dimension of, and then you can work within that dimension system. So once I've got that set up, I'm going to go up to this little menu. Notice it's just like the little panel menus, looks the same, and choose Render Grids to Photoshop. Now, I can't tell you why, but sometimes when you do this, this is grayed out. If that happens, just click OK, close it, go back to the Vanishing Point tool, open it up again. This grid will be here, and then choose it. And it's always active the second time. I don't know why. Certain times it works and certain times it doesn't, but it will do it. And then click OK. So now you can see that that grid has just been placed back on my grid layer. So I can turn it off and on. It's not overlapping the photograph or anything. And that gives me what I need to be able to start designing a courtyard within here. So now that I've done that, I'm going to close this layer group. I'm going to make a new layer, call that, let's just call that ground plane. Because I'm going to start by sketching some forms here, and then I might want, maybe I'll make another layer for plants, or how about trees? I can make another layer for shrubs, another layer for furnishings. You know, you can do as many as you want, and again, hold the Shift key down, click on the top one, Shift key, bottom one, click on the bottom one. Go to my menu, choose new group from layers. We'll call that design concept. So now I can come in here under ground plane And I'm going to do this with, I know I haven't told you how to use the Cintiqs yet, and I think it's better that we wait till Monday. So you can scribble this with a mouse. It's not very easy, but if you choose the brush tool, just click on this brush tool here. Make sure you don't choose the pencil tool or the color replacement tool or the mixer brush tool. You just want the standard brush tool. If you move up to the top, you can click and just choose a basic. I've got a bunch of custom brushes in here. Just choose a basic hard round, maybe set it to, I don't know, 4 pixels, something like that. And if I click outside here, it'll close that down. And now I can come in here. Let's see, I definitely don't want blue, right? Because my grid's blue. So I'm going to choose hot pink just so I can see it. And I can say, okay, now that I have this brush, I'm going to come across here. I want to create a nice little seating area. It's going to come up here, over, back, over there. I want some plantings that are going to extend along this side. So this is where I'm going to have some tables and chairs, maybe umbrella table. And I'm not worried so much about you getting this perfectly to scale or anything else, just to be able to say, yeah, oops, if you mess something up, just do an undo. Okay, just start sketching out your ideas, and then you can come up to your next layer, to trees, and say, okay, I'm going to go green on that one. I want to have some trees planted back here. You know, I don't care how good it is. Now, if I have the pen, I can do trees that look a little better than what I can draw with the mouse. I can switch to my shrub layer. Say, okay, I want some other plants over here. And I'm just following those grid lines and trying to put in some of that information. I also know that since this is the horizon line, let's pick a better color. And if somebody's standing up closer into here, then their head's going to be bigger, their body's going to be bigger. But their eyeballs are always going to line up in the horizon line. So you can start thinking about giving scale to that. And again, always switch layers. I go down to the tree. Maybe I go to a lighter green. Just fill this in to try and get an idea of how it's going to screen out the back view there. So that's the kind of thing I want you to do. Just start thinking about how you're going to set up the design for your area. If we got a water feature, you may decide, well, I'm going to get rid of these. I want to come in here. Maybe I'll go to furnishings. And I'm going to come in here. I'll draw fountain. So if it's a circle, it's going to be superimposed between 4 of those squares. Have some water in there. whatever level you can sketch. It doesn't matter what it looks like. Just start putting in the kinds of elements that you might want to include within that space, using that perspective grid that we created with the Vanishing Point tool as a way to do that. You don't have to worry about, exact materials. And I could come in here and go with the perspective lines and draw some tan in there to represent paving material that I want to put in there as opposed to lawn. Enough that you start thinking about the space. I really don't expect it to be complete or finished, but it gives us a place to start with. I can give you some ideas on it. And once you do this, then I can say, okay, I need some trees that are look something like this shape and size, and then you know how big a resolution you really need to be able to capture those. So don't worry about finding actual images. Just think about your design and sketch it into this space. Now the two spaces, actually I have three. I don't care if you use any three. This is material building. This is supposed to be, the theme of this is, sorry, I just drew on my image. The theme of this is over near Cafe Laura. It's hotel and restaurant management. So this is an event space. So if you're going to do this and create a garden, you create a garden that they can hold events in, catered events. They could have a band out there, a tent, seating, waiters and waitresses, people hobnobbing. It could be alumni weekend. It could be anything, whatever you want it to be. But that's the theme for this space. I mentioned the Runkle Hall. This should be like a study garden. So this one you can see I have a grid laid out in there. So seating for 1 or 2 people, tables for groups to study, paving, water features, maybe screening to block off some of the roads, and the use of plants to create different subspaces within this one big space. And you can see here actually in this one that this is a tree that wasn't in there. It was pasted into there, but you can see that it's actually behind the leaves of the tree that's in the photo. That's something we'll pick up on Monday, show you how to use that kind of paste into technique so that you can actually place an image into a photograph to make it look like it's actually part of the original photograph, even though it isn't. And then the last space was the ag science space. Excuse me. So again, this is entry space. I might try and open this view up to the entrance itself. There's bikes scattered over. Maybe we consolidate those. There's some tables or benches back in here. Maybe we create seating out here. You could have a water feature instead of a tree out there. Change some of the paving, extra seating, whatever you might like to do. So I'll post all 3 of these, and you can use any of those. But again, study garden, Runkle Hall, Mateer, event space, ag science, entry gathering space. And you can, the design is yours. And again, so I know you haven't done the design work, and I don't expect it to be amazing, but just think about the kind of space, and definitely whichever one you choose, go visit it. Spend some time there, pace it off. When you go to Runkle Hall, there are some columns here. What's the distance between here and here in the real world? Then when you set this grid up, if that's 20 feet, this is 5, 10, 15, 20. So these are 5-foot grids. That's really useful information that you need to understand. So go out there and measure it. If you don't have a tape measure, pace it off. Same with material. What's the spacing between here and these railings? How big are these doors? How high are they? Just get an idea of that space. And same here. There's paving grids out here already. What's the scale of that? Is that 5 by 5, 10 by 10, 6 by 6? Figure that out, and then you'll understand. How high is this? Is that 3 feet, 4 feet, 6 feet? How many steps are in there? Get a little of that information, and then we'll be able to use that to figure out the proper scale for the elements that we add. So that's the basic idea that I want you to work on for Monday. You can review through this. It's really just that first step of setting up some layers, figuring out the perspective, creating the grid using the Vanishing Point tool, and then once you have that, start coming up with sketching some ideas. And you could do design concept, 1, and then you could create another folder, create these same layers, and come up with a second concept. Generate as many ideas as you can, and then we'll have a chance to talk about those when I get back and start moving on from there to be able to add some photographic images to replace the rough sketches that you have. All right, I hope that's enough. I'll get this stuff posted and look forward to seeing you on Monday.